Thank you all here on a beautiful summer afternoon / evening. I imagine it's pretty hard to get people out on a day like this. I am Macky McCleary. I'm the Deputy Commissioner of Environmental Quality for the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, and I'm excited to talk about trash. Let's Talk Trash is somewhat cheeky, but it's a very important idea. We've been going around to communities over the last several months to start a conversation that we feel has been, I wouldn't say forgotten, but perhaps we've gotten a bit complacent. I know that as much as 20, 30 years ago, when we were really starting recycling programs in many places, you saw recycling as being in your school curriculum. You saw it billboards and as well as television commercials, radio ads. That seems to have slowly faded away as we got a certain amount of success, but not anywhere near what I think the potential for recycling either was then or certainly is now and going forward. So I'm pretty excited to talk to you guys today. I'm going to try to, oh, good, okay. So I want to talk broadly about what the state, why the state is doing what we're doing, what it is that we have recently passed either this year or the years before, but more importantly about what we see as both necessary and what we are trying to make occur for frankly, the rest of the 21st century and why. So put simply, trash is a great triple or quadruple recycling is a great triple or quadruple bottom line issue. And what I mean by that is that it has significant economic benefit, has significant environmental benefit, it has significant energy benefit, and it has significant, frankly, benefit for your soul, if you think about it. More recycling means less pollution and a variety of pollution. Waste itself is pollution, but the things that go into creating the products that we throw away are also polluting. Additionally, there's both particulate and carbon pollution that comes from driving around the trucks that carry waste. So every time we recycle something, we are taking both valuable commodities and putting them back in the system, but we're also preventing, and this is kind of the unrung bell, preventing pollution from occurring that would go along with the processing of waste as waste. So how did we get here? So Connecticut in 1973 started an organization called the Connecticut Resource Recovery Authority, which ended up being, yes, I know, which ended up being the conduit through which waste policy was generated and infrastructure was created throughout the state for the next 20 years. That organization went forward to, frankly, help and be the main reason why Connecticut was able to declare an end to landfills or landfilling in Connecticut before any other state. There's no other state that is close. And I'll show you a little bit of data. We have a lot to be proud of in terms of the forward thinking that has been going on in Connecticut with regards to how we manage waste for the last 30 or 40 years. That said, much of that waste to energy infrastructure, which is what allowed us to stop landfilling, and that is these are incineration plants using a couple different types of technology, but that fundamentally, rather than burying the trash in the ground, pretty much set it on fire so that you can get electricity from it. Now, it's better than burying it in the ground. And at the time, there was, first of all, in 1973, there was no real possibility to recycle at all. There wasn't statewide recycling. As we've both changed human behavior and the regulatory structure to make recycling a better alternative, there is basically a waste hierarchy. And what that means is that there are other options that we could use in order to manage that waste in the future. And we are kind of right now at what I would call a watershed moment in Connecticut. And the reason for that is that the power purchase agreements and the long-term waste contracts that came along with those facilities' construction, so that's how they finance the construction of those facilities, are all expiring over the next several years. And so we've got both a problem and an opportunity. Part of the issue is that the economics of those facilities has changed. Put simply, the introduction of natural gas into the electricity market has significantly depressed the amount of value that waste-to-energy facilities get for their electricity. It's good for us as consumers because our electricity prices should be going down. But it also is a challenge for generating facilities because electricity that they used to be able to sell for 20 cents a kilowatt hour is now being sold at wholesale for 4 cents a kilowatt hour. So that's a really big change. What that means is that we've got to figure out what we're going to do from an infrastructure point of view. In a way, materials management and sustainable materials management is kind of, it's a perfect issue for our organization, in particular our new merged organization, the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. For the longest time, we were just the Department of Environmental Protection. Connecticut had no source for energy policy at all, as was evidenced by our total lack of energy policy. So this is a great issue wherein what we call the 3 E's, energy, environment, and economy, are aligned. Because recycling is a very, very important jobs driver, revenue driver for municipalities. So a couple interesting statistics on this chart. Right now, these are direct and then one order outside of direct jobs, almost 5,000 jobs in reuse and recycling industries just in Connecticut. That said, we have a really large opportunity. So we had a very conservative estimate done about 5 years ago by a consultant we hired that said that we are burning at least $10 million worth of recyclable, valuable commodities each year in Connecticut. That doesn't sound like a lot of money when you're talking about an $18 billion budget, but to someone at a municipal level, when you break that out into the municipal level, even if you broke it out evenly to 169 municipalities, that turns into a relatively large chunk of change. And you're talking about municipalities that in some cases are making the decision of how many teachers am I going to hire or fire? Do I need a new fire truck? Do I need a new fireman? How do I, these are important decisions where $30,000 or $40,000 can make a really big difference. And so we are wasting it right now. And so the question is, how can we, so one last thing is that if we were able to get to a 40% recycling rate, so right now we're stuck statewide at about 25%, and we have been for about 15 years, which is embarrassing. If we were able to get to 40%, if you just took out the savings for the collection and disposal of waste, it's $35 million across all the towns. Now, the $10 million figure, this is the economic value of the commodities. The $35 million is avoided disposal costs. Our collection system is very expensive, and this is a huge opportunity for us. Additionally, on the environmental side, so recycling is the second best reducer of greenhouse gas emissions possible. The first is energy efficiency, and in Connecticut, I would actually argue that has less of an impact because of Millstone. Our actual power portfolio is very, very clean. So I always argue, and the Deputy Commissioner of Energy and I don't agree on this, although she and I, we went to college together, so it's fine if I make fun of her, but I always give this talk, and if she's here, she says that's not true. But Katie would argue that it is energy efficiency and renewable energy and then recycling. Second or third, it doesn't matter. Regardless, it's important. And that's going to be the major environmental issue of our age. Both being forced to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions as well as adapting to the fact that we're so late in doing so that we are going to have to make significant changes to our infrastructure and lives to respond to what climate change is already going to happen. Other air pollutants, for example, in many of the larger cities or towns where you've got large facilities like MidCon, you've got significant issues with particulate pollution, not from the facility itself, but from the trucks. So from the diesel trucks. Diesel trucks emit particulate matter, and you have very high asthma rates. So among the highest asthma rates in the country are South Bronx, right where the Cross Bronx Expressway goes through, because you have all those trucks, all the commerce that comes from Elizabeth, New Jersey, and goes all of New England, goes right through the South Bronx, and that's your greatest example of what particulate emissions can do to the health of an area. So when we take those trucks off the road, we are making our communities more healthy. And many of these communities are places where these facilities have been placed. It's a real environmental justice issue. They were put there because it was the poorest community where no one could say no. And so it's a really great opportunity for us to right a wrong that's in many decades old in some cases. Additionally, reduces the need for virgin materials. I'll give you two nerdy statistics. Being a McKinsey guy, I'm very data-centric. One is it is 500 times cheaper to get an ounce of gold out of a cell phone than it is to get it out of the ground. 500 times. So that is a very cheap ounce of gold that you are getting out of that cell phone that's why everyone wants to take your cell phones back now, by the way. It's not because they're nice, it's because there's gold in there. There's probably a little more than an ounce in each cell phone. Yeah.
What in each cell phone?
Yeah, I might be wrong about that. Don't quote me on that. But there's a lot of, so gold is an unbelievably good conductor. Yeah. It is all over your electronics. It's just not that easy to extract. So, but it's also why you see people in many cases, especially in developing countries, they don't steal your computer because they want the data. They steal your computer because they want the metals. And that is true of cell phones or any other type of computer. So the other one is, if you had to guess, what organization do you think is responsible for the largest percentage of recycled aluminum on Earth? Anyone want to guess? No cheating. She's heard this talk before, so. No guesses? Come on, someone's got to guess. I'm going to start calling on people. Did I hear something? Go ahead.
Beverages.
It's a good guess. Yeah, so the answer is actually Alcoa. Alcoa is the company that makes aluminum out of bauxite. It's the largest aluminum mining company on Earth. And for them, bottom line wise, again, have you ever looked at what a piece of bauxite looks like? Bauxite kind of looks like red rock. That gets turned into an aluminum can. That is expensive in water, electricity, and money. And so it is a lot cheaper for Alcoa to drive recycling by either paying recycling facilities or buying virgin recycled aluminum from those facilities than it is for them to turn bauxite into aluminum. And there's a limited amount of bauxite. So one other interesting statistic is because aluminum is so valuable also in electronics and all kinds of advanced materials, about 70% of the aluminum that's ever been mined out of the earth, that aluminum that's been turned into aluminum, is still in circulation. So it is very easy to make aluminum back into aluminum. It is a perfect material to recycle. So even when I see a difference between a 90% aluminum recycling rate and that 10% difference, that's easily made up by the market. If you give the market the opportunity to take that additional 10% of aluminum back out, it will, because aluminum is $2,000 a ton. It is very expensive, and it is really easy. So generally, there's some kind of structural problem which prevents it from getting recycled, or someone just throws it in the wrong place. But most cases, especially a lot of cases, if you throw it in the wrong place, someone will just take it right back out. Take it someplace where they can get 5 cents for it. So I'll keep going here. I talked through the nerdy stuff here a little bit. We think it saves a lot of gasoline as well. So this is an interesting chart as well. This is what I was saying before. So minimal landfilling, if you take diversion from landfill as your primary goal, you see that Connecticut is above every other state in the union and every other country on Earth except for 4. The challenge is that big red bar is waste to energy. And waste to energy's business model is in trouble, as well as the fact that in terms of the hierarchy, it's probably not as good as recycling, which is the blue bar, or composting and anaerobic digestion, which is the green bar. So if you were to rethink about this, this is kind of 20th century thinking, or where we were when we started in 1973. So Connecticut's doing great. When you take 21st century look at it and you say, you know what? It turns out that recycling and composting is more important to me than waste to energy. And so I want to privilege those above, then Connecticut suddenly falls down the table. Now, of course, there are a lot of other states still behind us, but we don't view our competitive set as Texas. We view our competitive set as New England, California, and Europe, because they're the organizations that are most like Connecticut in terms of policy, if you think about it that way. So the issue is that this big red bar, I want, in the long term, we would be much better if we had a big blue bar and a smaller red bar. The red bar doesn't go away. I want to be clear that waste to energy is still a 21st century waste management system requires that you can't recycle everything. We cannot yet, at least with the current technology and business environment, get to what I would call zero waste, although that is our goal. there's still going to be some left over. About 25 to 30% is either difficult to recycle, or there's no market for, or for some reason it chemically can't be recycled. There's some reason why we can't use it again. Where we are right now is at about 60 to 65% we are setting on fire. We know that that's going to have to decrease over time because of market forces and because of, honestly, changes in price. So what are we going to do? So we call it the 4 I's: innovate, integrate, incentivize, invest. So innovate. Foster economic development and job creation through increased materials recovery. What does that mean? I'll give you an example. Last week I was in Houston at the brand new tire recycling facility by a Danish company called Gainen, which is in Houston, which was an odd place to start an environmental company. And I was there, myself and the Deputy Commissioner of Economic Development, Ron Angelo, were there talking to the US CEO, asking them 2 things, or trying to sell them on 2 things. Number 1, we want you to build your next facility in Connecticut because we think we can serve all of New England. Number 2, what are you doing in Texas? Bring your US headquarters here. Texas is not an ideologically safe environment for your company. You know, they're surrounded by oil pipeline storage areas, and you see the look on the Danish guys' faces because they've got a US CEO, but it's all these Danish guys. And they've got this beautiful LEED gold green building that's in front of their factory, their administrative building, and they're looking out at oil everywhere. It is an odd juxtaposition, and so our argument is we think you should come here. And we have a lot of tires in New England. We in fact just retired Sterling tire incinerating facility, which was taking 9 million tires. Not a great environmental outcome, incineration for tires. What these guys do is entirely mechanical, turns it back into tires, and in many cases turns it back into other materials that can be used in other things like asphalt and other things. It's great. So that is our example of innovate. So it's a pretty atypical role for an environmental commissioner to be out attracting businesses. That is what we believe our role is, in particular on recycling. And we've already been successful. Pascal Cohen came down from Quebec when we passed the mattress recycling bill last year. And he's got a facility outside of Hartford. There's another facility in Bridgeport. I know Pascal, the CEO, is thinking about opening a carpet recycling facility as well, even though we haven't passed a carpet recycling bill yet. So we think that this can be a big jobs driver. We're really excited about it. Integrate. Redefine the role of regional organizations. Just last year, this year actually, we passed the bill that redefined CRA. I've been working in my other Let's Talk Trash events, talking to the heads of the other regional organizations, of which there's a variety of levels of both regulatory capability, investment, and kind of how they interact with their region. We think there's a huge opportunity to rationalize that, to hopefully empower those regional organizations. Well, CRA, we actually did the opposite, because they used to be a statewide organization. We made it clearer that they're a regional organization with more limited scope. With the other organizations, I think there's a question of how can we help them take on a greater role in our policy, and I think they're very excited about that. Incentivize, reducing municipal costs and burdens, so helping municipalities do the things that will help people change behavior, whether you're talking about pay-as-you-throw or billboards for recycling or changing their school curriculums to have, because frankly, I have a 3.5-year-old. If she came home and told me that I needed to recycle, I would do it, because otherwise she will cry. It is a very simple way in which they get us to do things, but we stopped investing in that. And so that's something that we're also going to change. And I'll tell you a little bit more about something pretty cool we're going to do there later. And then environmentally beneficial infrastructure, balancing stability and market responsiveness. Now that is a little bit of a mouthful. What that basically means is there are several areas wherein the new collection and management technologies are not yet extant in Connecticut. I'll give you one example is organics. So while the workhorse of the organics infrastructure fleet, if you will, is still going to be composting, which is a very old technology. There are other components which are more flexible, like anaerobic digestion, and a few other slightly fancier organics tools that we are trying to have the market create for us by laying out incentives properly. We've got a few of the facilities currently are on the drawing board. We'll probably have 3 or 4 in the state within 20 months, which we're excited about. And we think that's also going to be an important tool for the market, because the good thing about digesters is that you can adjust their fuel intake based on market situation. So they can take more food or more yard based on the season, and still create energy on the other side. Not as much as incineration, but it's nice to have multiple streams of value. In fact, you can even use them to create natural gas. If you want to, you can use them to create fuel rather than electricity if that's a better market. So that's nice. So this is the hierarchy that I was talking about before. So landfill, incineration, landfill, energy recovery, which is a different form of incineration, and includes, the top end of this would include things like anaerobic digestion. So you're recovering energy from the material and turning it into something useful. Composting, recycling, source reduction is don't buy it. Or don't make it. And actually, that's another interesting one we may get to, the future of extended producer responsibility. So 3 market-based strategies that we have in examples here. Beneficial use determinations. This is, okay, I'm digging a pipeline. I've got a bunch of soil. Where do I put the soil? Currently in Connecticut, in most cases you have to truck it out of state. You cannot put it back in the same hole, which is a little silly. So we've been working using this regulatory tool we have called beneficial use or beneficial reuse determinations, which allows us on a project by project, or in some cases a company by company basis, to say it's okay for you to reuse this soil, honestly, to put it back in the same hole, or in other cases to put it under a road or other things like that if you're worried about what might be in it. But we just ask you to test it, make sure you're not putting it in a drinking water area, and you should be able to reuse it. That's a really big money savings for anyone who's building any kind of infrastructure in Connecticut. Extended producer responsibility, that's your mattress bill. That's the thermostats that we did. We did a paint bill. I don't know if you folks know that you can recycle your paint now. Up on the docket this next year, we're looking at doing batteries. We've got a bunch of industry support. So the battery industry has been gung-ho to do this, which is, I say, yes, okay, great. We'll write you a bill. And then tires, which is going to help us attract a couple tire recyclers here. We think is a very important opportunity. So I think disinvestment, or kind of disentangling from waste to energy, we're what I would call overinvested right now. Again, it's still a very important disposal technology, but having a 65% of our portfolio there is too much, and it makes our infrastructure a little bit unstable, because when electricity prices crater like they have, we're in danger of, I mean, the facilities have been going along, but we could have a disruptive change in the market, and don't want to leave trash in the streets. That'll bring an emperor down the same as it brings a mayor. I think that was Nero's problem, right? Was the trash in the streets? You guys, does anyone remember the Roman history? He was also not a very nice person, but I think trash was really his problem. And it's also asked us to put together a new solid waste management plan, which is really going to be our map for the 21st century. So the one thing I want to talk about on this, the other thing is that, yes, Lori mentioned the diversion rate. We call it recycling right here, but it's really diversion, because when you include compost and other things, it's diverting from landfill. You're not really recycling food waste. I guess arguably, if you're using compost to grow more food, that's kind of a form of recycling, but we call it diversion. It's a little bit a cleaner term. Really interesting thing that we've done, and I've gotten already a lot of interest in, is create an organization called Recycle CT. And it is a 501c3, it's a foundation that will be able to do several things. First, it will be responsible for the statewide marketing of recycling behavior. So that will mean buying ads on TV, on the radio, you'll see them on billboards, out of home. They're already on a lot of trash trucks, mostly because the people who collect the trash have a big incentive to get you to recycle more because they get money for it. But yeah, so putting that back out in the world. Second is to develop curriculum with the Department of Education, which we want to be built into the science curriculum starting in kindergarten, frankly, all the way through 12th grade, about recycling and composting as part of the education. And then lastly, to provide direct grants to municipalities. And I just got a call today from a wealthy foundation person who's looking for places to invest his money to increase. He's particularly interested in organics and composting at the municipal level. And I said, well, hey, just so happens I've come up with, the thing is we haven't incorporated a Recycle CT yet. We probably have another month before we get all the legal stuff done, so I've just got to kind of go like this until we get the thing set up. But we're really excited about that. We changed the name to CRA, and we also narrowed its responsibility, but we're changing it to the Materials Innovation and Recycling Authority, which is an important name change for a variety of reasons, not least of which is that CRA's long history and all of the elbows that they had to bend out of shape in order to get a lot of that infrastructure built have left a relatively nasty taste in many people's mouths. And so we want to change people's association, but we also want to change the organization's goals. So I was at their board meeting. They're changing their brand, they're changing their values, they're actually going to be coming up with a new mission statement. I'm pretty excited to see what Mira becomes over the next couple of years. And then lastly, actually, I'll skip the middle one because we talked a little bit about that already. We are partnering with Mira and the member communities to develop an RFP for new technology to replace the facility at MidCon. And what I mean by that is we want a better environmental outcome than what we're getting from MidCon. And that could mean anything. We are very open-minded. It could mean a huge composting facility. It could mean no facility at all and just using existing facilities around us, but getting higher recycling rates somehow. Whatever, we are going to set up a set of criteria which make it clear that there is a relationship between the environmental outcome. We also think that it can be cheaper. So part of the issue with the current facility is that because the electricity prices are so far down, the business model doesn't work, which means the only other place to pay for it is in tip fees. And so the solution needs to be cheaper, better environmental outcome, and frankly, hopefully something a lot more flexible market-wise. And we'll see what the industry comes to us with. We've already seen a lot of presentations which make us think that we can get something good. A couple of other things that are done. One, there's this cap of Mira staff, although that's not as impactful as that looks. Their current staffing level is actually, I think, about 49. So going down to 45 is not really that big of a deal. But more interestingly, we've tried to make the permitting action for facility owners much easier. So basically, if you're going to recycle more of a known recycle and you own a facility, you just let us know. As long as it's below a certain threshold, you just let us know and tell how much is moving through your facility, and you can go tomorrow. You send us a letter. As before, it used to take a year, sometimes 2 years for us to process a permit, which is not in line with our policy goals. And the problem is that just to defend us, we just don't have enough people to do all the work that we have to do. But what we were not able to do by statute was privilege the work that we thought was more important. So you just came in the queue and you stayed in the queue regardless of what type of work you're doing. You could be saying, I want to recycle 60 more tons a day, and you could be sitting behind a guy who just wants to trick us into landfilling a bunch of trash. And that's the queue. This allows you to get out of the queue, which we're really excited about. And then again, we also gave ourselves an additional ability to provide direct grants to municipalities for voluntary recycling and diversion, although we didn't fund it, which is how we got it by OPM. But we'll fund it next year. We talked about this. There's an electricity purchase component as well, which I think was going to provide some stability to the market. You know, if you're really concerned about a disruptive failure of some of the facilities, the state and the municipalities are going to be getting together to purchase electricity at market competitive rates. But in the way the relationship will work will allow the current set of facilities to allow the market to decide which of those facilities are going to continue going forward in a much more stable and predictable way. It prevents instability. I talked a little bit about extended producer responsibility. I mentioned that our legislative priorities, we've got batteries, carpet, and tires. I'm not exactly sure about carpet right now. The carpet industry is not excited about this. Commissioner and I are going to be flying to Georgia, where apparently all carpet manufacturers are in one town in Georgia. So we're going to be doing that sometime in the fall to see whether we can get them back in the fold. But batteries and tires, we've got a lot of support both from the industry and from the community, so we're really excited about that. The more interesting ones that are going to come after that, we've got packaging. And we talked a little bit about styrofoam. there are real questions about what packaging extended producer responsibility even means. So first of all, who is responsible for packaging? It's not always the producer of the product. Sometimes it's Amazon. Sometimes it's, so it's hard to decide what the site of responsibility is. It's also hard to decide what you charge and where it goes and a whole bunch of other questions. That said, if you really can solve packaging, a whole bunch of other stuff goes away, right? Your tonnage goes way down. Your pay-as-you-throw, everything, it's kind of the home run of extended producer responsibility. We started doing some research on it. We'll probably spend another year or two. We're actually co-investing with all of our New England states on this issue with a consultant, and hopefully in a year or so we'll have a better answer, at least of what the questions are. And then once we have a clear sense of what the right questions to ask are, we can go out and start to come up with, formulate real policy. The only thing I'll say is that packaging EPR is essentially a backdoor carbon price. So if you get a carbon price before the next 4 or 5 years, then you don't really need packaging EPR. I don't know whether we'll really get a carbon price that soon, but you never know. Talked a little bit about this. We've got stakeholder meetings. One of the things, we have these stakeholder meetings, we have policymaker stakeholder meetings, and then we also have more public stakeholder meetings. So the recycling committee should start to receive some invitations. The recycling committees that we know of, that our staff know of, will get invitations to the public meetings, and hopefully you can send a representative or two to the conversations about, in particular, packaging and printed material as we get out in the world and start to talk about, since we'll be among the first, it's really hard to understand the impacts on the citizenry from the ivory tower in Hartford. So we really need to hear from people. This is a little nerdy. This is how we decided which ones were important. This is the regional version of the same thing. One thing that my staff wanted to make sure that I passed along was that the Connecticut Product Stewardship Council, which is an organization that exists here in Connecticut, provides information on EPR as well as advocacy for municipalities that are interested in helping drive adoption up. It doesn't cost anything, and you just need to call Tom or email him to have your recycling committee or your municipality join. So, with that said, I tried to give you a gloss of, and I didn't even really talk about everything, of all of the different things that we think are important and where we think we're going future-wise. We've got quite a bit of momentum, but at the end of the day, you guys are where the rubber meets the road. So I'd love to hear from you, questions, concerns, suggestions, anything you want to do just to respond to anything that I said today. I'll leave the floor open. Just if you could do me a favor of introducing yourself, and then I'll try to repeat your question for the microphone just in case there's a sound issue, if that's okay. I sometimes forget to repeat the question though, so just remind me. Okay, go ahead.
John Hampton,
Hey,
thanks
John.
for being here.
Of course.
And the pesticides, I saw,
Mhm.
we didn't talk too much about that, but in the legislature this year trying to address, not as successfully as we want, to address the pesticide issue. What's your take on, moving forward, if there's a bill pushed forward on banning it on playing fields or
Mhm.
schools?
So,
Certainly that's something I'd like to see moving forward.
so John's asking about, well, I'll paraphrase, but it's like pesticides generally, what our policy goals are there. I know the legislature tried to take some action this year, in particular on how it's used. So there we were talking about pesticides EPR, which is people who produce pesticides being responsible for the end of life of those pesticides. But at the same time, we have a much broader department policy shift that is in the process of occurring. So our goal is to be introducing our own bill, not dissimilar from some of the work that was done in the legislature. I think work that's a little bit broader. So we're doing 2 studies right now on pesticides, not just human toxicity, but the real issue with pesticides, the developing issue is bees. So pollinators are a critical component so if all the bees die, we all die. And not surprisingly, when you're talking about pesticides, bees are insects. They kill bees. So they've tried to design them in ways that they have low toxicity so they're not immediately toxic to bees, but it's looking more and more like low toxicity over long periods of time is extremely dangerous for bee populations. And so we are trying to formulate long-term policy that I think reflects what I would call the growing scientific concerns. The challenge with pesticides is that most of the human health and even the bee health issues are over such long time spans that the studies that would prove the points, A, have way too many variables for you to be certain in the near term, and B, I can't wait 60 years to make a piece of policy that's impacting the lives of all those people. So we have what we call the precautionary principle, the point at which the threshold of worry reaches high enough for us to take a precautionary action until more evidence exists. And that's kind of, we're thinking about where that threshold is and how to formulate a future policy based on that. But it's there we were really just talking about end of life with the manufacturer. So it's a slightly different issue, but since the other issue is important, I'm happy to talk a little bit more about it.
It's interesting because I was cleaning out my parents' basement
Mm-hmm.
and all these ancient, horrible.
Oh gosh.
pesticides.
Yeah, what do you do with them? It's a hazardous waste.
Yeah, I guess that's what we
Yeah.
to hazardous waste
Yeah.
baskets, right?
Mhm.
I mean, it's,
That's what you'd have to do. I mean, pesticides EPR would solve that problem for a lot of people. I would say you can take it back to this place, or in many cases, I mean, with paint, you can just take it back to Home Depot. Home Depot probably does not want to handle hazardous waste like that, so we'll have to come up with something different. But it is a real challenge for people.
What happens to all this hazardous waste that gets collected?
There are a small number of hazardous waste disposal facilities in the United States.
Oh,
And they make a lot of money collecting hazardous waste from places where there aren't very many hazardous waste disposal facilities like Connecticut.
What do they do?
It depends. There are some that actually have figured out how to incinerate it. There are some that bury it in a really big safe in the ground. Think about it. That's what Yucca Mountain basically was going to be. Those are the two main concepts. Some of it can actually be denatured chemically. It depends on really what it is. Depends on the product. Other questions? Oh, go ahead.
Barbara Chase. What about food waste? Restaurants, grocery produce, that kind of thing.
So Barbara asked about food waste, and it's actually an area I didn't talk a lot about here because our major food waste policy work was done last year and the year before. So I'll tell you that food waste is the biggest opportunity in terms of diversion for the state of Connecticut over the next 10 years. And what we've done is two things. One is we've created a law that means that if you're a commercial food waste producer, a grocery store, or someone who produces, like ESPN, for example, has more than 100 tons a month, you have to, if there is a disposal facility, composting or anaerobic digestion within 20 miles of your location, you have to send it to a facility. You don't have to send it to that facility if they're charging too much, but you have to send it to a facility. And the reason why we're excited about that is because that has already started to create the infrastructure for the broadening of food waste collection in the state of Connecticut. So we think about regulation in a different way than Massachusetts. Massachusetts tends to ban things and let the market figure it out. We would prefer to, which is effective, it just hurts sometimes. We would prefer to create a market landscape in which the infrastructure develops so that when any kind of requirement or further incentivization for the disposal of food waste at these facilities comes true, the infrastructure is already there to collect it. And the infrastructure is already there to manage it once it gets there, as opposed to it trying to find a home once the ban comes in. Which is just a little bit of a scarier way to handle essentially the same thing, which is that I want you to figure out, we're basically both saying to the market, I want you to figure out what to do. We're just nicer about it than Massachusetts is. Does that answer your question? I didn't talk a lot about it, not because it's not important to us, but because for this year's legislative work, we really focused on the things that I talked about, but it is a huge component of our overall umbrella of how we get to that 60% diversion rate. Go ahead.
I'm Lonnie Schultz.
Hi, Lonnie.
Are there ideas about what individual households can do more of?
Yeah, well, you could recycle more. But to answer your question, yes. I think that at the state level, what we try to do is create the policy that allows municipalities to lay out the direct incentives for individuals at the household level. I think the most important tools that come to mind right now, I think that the most important policy tool is probably pay as you throw. People don't like to use that term anymore because everyone's afraid of it, but fundamentally waste has cost, and we need to reveal that cost to the individual so that the person is incentivized to recycle more. It's a very simple pricing mechanism. It is the best tool that municipalities have, because essentially what's happening is municipalities, haulers, everyone else in the system is on pay as you throw except for the consumer, which is not really good if you're trying to have price get translated across the entire market. And that is a very important tool. It will impact individual households. The other one that I'm very much excited about, and I just talked to one of my staff today about it, we're thinking about creating some kind of educational capability for composting. So they're calling it a composting school. I don't think I'm going to get it. That's not going to get by the charter folks, but some way for us to have a yearly or even quarterly composting capability, composting teaching. So a place where you can go ask questions, but also this is, you know, a week-long class on what you're supposed to do. So getting out more information for individual homeowners about how to handle their own organic and food waste those are the two things. So I think at the municipal level, while it's very politically difficult, we want to figure out ways to make it easier for municipalities to do pay-as-you-throw at the municipal level, and then at the individual level, giving people the tools to make the right choices with their organic waste. Does that make sense? Also recycle more. Go ahead. Yeah.
I'm Mark Scully. It seems like so many of these things that we're incinerating have some value.
Yes.
Some companies have been able to find that value and run a business, but it seems like a market failure that so much of it is not being harvested. And I get a very general question, but do you see, or what do you see as potential business opportunities for?
Oh my God,
where you wish you had companies who would step up and provide a service.
That question is so hard to answer. There's so much money in trash. It is literally made of money if you think about it. So it'd be easier for me to say, well, the major business opportunity. So there are the two most important tools for, I think, increasing the degree of the amount of things that are diverted, technological and behavior. So if I were a company or someone who was trying to come up with an app or some hard infrastructure, I would try to figure out a way to do a better job of mechanically separating. So in places like Waterbury and Bridgeport, where there's significant structural impediments to separation in multi-unit housing that was built in the 60s and 70s, there just isn't a location for it. So the question is there a mechanical fix to that? And that is that's ideologically controversial to many people, but in some cases, I think it may be a solution that's worth pursuing if there is a technological answer that can say, okay, yes, well, it turns out you multi-unit housing facilities, just put it all in one bin and we'll separate out and we can get 98% out of the recyclable materials and the rest we'll send to a burn plant. That's a pretty good outcome to me. So that's one. The other one is, what are the tools to change human behavior? So do you guys know anything about O-Power? O-Power is an energy efficiency company that uses social psychology to adjust people's energy consumption behavior. So I have a Nest thermostat. They do a similar thing where they tell you information about how your neighbors use power. And give you price incentives for consuming at certain times of the day that are off peak and other things like that. So it is that is kind of this whole social behavior. You can patent tools like that. I mean, they have this little device that's I don't know what it is really. It's just a little, looks like a beeper, but it tells you all this information about how power is being consumed in your neighborhood, and it's been really effective in Massachusetts at changing people's power consumption. So those are the two areas I would focus if I were a business person. I mean, I am a business person, so I actually constantly come up with new companies, and I'm trying very hard not to dive in headlong. But yeah, no, there is a huge amount of opportunity. I mean, organics is another one. I mean, most of the technology is really old. That doesn't mean that it's not good. If you could discover, I'm sure there's some secret Egyptian organics composting capability that turns it into the bricks that made the pyramids. I don't know. But there's a lot of stuff out there. It's almost anything you look at in solid waste, there's probably some way to think about reusing it. So Go ahead.
My name is Dan Weissman. I want to continue on the point that this gentleman made, and you are kind of glossing over the entire issue. That the fact is, today, most of what you discuss is probably borderline or not economical.
Incorrect. So it's fundamentally wrong. So I've actually done the economic analysis, and I've had my. So it's just to restate the statement.
I don't want analysis. I want companies that survive more than 1 year or 2 years. I'm in the packaging business for 40 years, and we lose more recyclers than we initiate every year.
Yes. Oh, there's a different reason for that. Yeah. So there's.
And, I don't think that, maybe I'm coming from a very narrow window on the world, but I don't believe that the other things, tire recycling is the issue of what? Since the automobile was invented 100 years ago, and maybe even before this, people tried to use the rubber in many ways over the years. If somebody would have figured out to make it economically, we wouldn't be sitting here. They wouldn't need legislation from you.
Yeah.
Other recycling is the same story. If it was a lot of money to do this, you're talking about gold in computers. We send it to China so they can kill themselves from the fumes from the solder.
So let me just quickly. So can I just okay? So I'll quickly go back to this slide. So the reason why we were talking about I want to answer your question in a variety of ways. So the product stewardship and extended producer responsibility is specifically targeted at things which are not economical on their own to recycle. That is why you create a market condition in which there is a socialization of the cost to recycle that, either across all the companies that make it or across the states. So that's why you see batteries and carpet and tires on this list, as opposed to the list of things which are existing in municipal solid waste, which are recyclable and economical. The other thing I'll tell you is that from a policy, so I think that answers your, critique of the concept of both batteries and e-waste falls into that category too.
I don't have critique. I'm trying
But
to
let me finish. Hold on.
I'm trying to look about the reality, what happened right now.
Right, but so the reason why we're creating a regulatory regime for these is because you're absolutely right. It does not make sense to recycle batteries right now because it costs too much. The question is, who should bear that cost? That's the question that we are trying to answer with producer responsibility. And that falls into pesticides. You're talking about carpet, batteries. What are the other ones we got on this list? Gas.
We don't count all the costs.
Yes, so that's what I was going to get to in a second. So the question is who bears that cost, and the reason is so I'll give you another example. So tires. So the total societal cost of the creation of tires are in no way reflected in the price of a tire at whether it comes on your car or whether you go to a tire place to buy one. The point of extended producer responsibility, again, to some extent, a backdoor carbon cost, is to try to reflect the societal costs of materials in the material itself, either at point of purchase or at point of production. So it changes the economics that you are talking about. The problem is that people don't like it when you reveal new costs. They're not new costs, they're hidden costs. And so changing the market so that the cost is no longer hidden is generally uncomfortable for most industries. The reason why we're really excited about tires and batteries is because those industries who are in the design of this actually bearing the cost that we are now reflecting are excited about the policy. That said, that doesn't mean that all these other places where the industry's not excited about it aren't on our list of things to do, but why not focus on the industries that are supportive of it, either from a values position, which is actually why you've got the battery manufacturers. They've got really big environmental goals that over the last 10 years they've shifted their company philosophy to take a lot of those things on board, or that in tires you've got a really big market demand, both of so you're right about recycling tires in terms of its relative economic value. It's not very easy to do. The technology that I just saw in Houston is new. So we're hopeful. It seems to be working well in Houston, and they seem to be making money. and they're able to compete with the guy down the road. And this is the most disturbing thing. There is a guy down the road who does the exact same thing. He takes in tires, and then he buries them in the ground. And that's it. But they're able to compete with that guy in terms of how much they're charging people for tip fees. So it seems to be working there. We're hopeful that something like that can work here. Technology advances. Just because change is slow doesn't mean it's not happening. That's the only thing I can tell you.
No, but we have to put somewhere, to realize that if we need to do this legislation and to force people to do this for our survival, we need to do this, right? Or if we don't want to do it, live with the consequences. The same discussion about global warming and everything else, You can ignore it, and in 2050 or 2075, our children or grandchildren will have to deal with this. Or, we can force, society to react in a certain way through legislation. But we are kind of trying to play both sides of the street simultaneously, and that's where all the confusion comes. I'll give you an example. I'm in a packaging business in PET, right?
Mm-hmm. It's a highly recyclable
PET
product.
For salad dressing, for ocean spray, right? PET they use in shampoo bottles. Is everything the same PET that they use for water bottles and for soda bottles? Guess what? There's no deposit on these bottles.
Yeah, don't.
Why?
Please don't get me started on the bottle bill, because, well, want me to tell you why? Because the executive branch doesn't make policy, the legislative branch does. So if you had only policy wonks deciding how those things were going to hurt, you'd have slightly different outcomes. But that's not how democracy works, unfortunately. So you get pieces of policy which are mezcla, mixed. It's good, gives and takes away. So I'm sorry about the bottle bill. It's about the oldest bottle bill in the country. Originally it was designed as an anti-litter mechanism. Now it's being used as a recycling tool. It is fundamentally not, it's not organized properly in order to deliver results on the recycling side. We are fully aware of it. It is extremely controversial. So I've been trying not to step on that mine for the last 2 years. I don't think I'm going to get away with it next year. There's going to be action on the bottle bill, and the question is, what's going to come out of it? We have no idea. Because I'm not going to proactively propose a change to the bottle bill because it's too controversial. And I don't really have a good answer on the broader packaging EPR issue. So until I do, I would not propose from the executive branch's point of view a half-done piece of legislation that'll end up with a worse market outcome than the bottle bill is. But the bottle bill is a mess. It's tough.
It looks like we started to recycle in this town, and I'm in the town 35 years. We used to go over there by the airport, and he used to put amber glass here, clear glass here, green glass here, and plastic here, right? Today, we have single-stream recycling. The area that I deal with, the only thing the single-stream recycling did for us is lower the value of the recycled material and increase contamination.
Yeah, it's a common problem with single stream.
Regardless what you say, you can get 98% for a single stream or whatever.
That's not what I said.
It's not as clean as the deposit material that we get.
Yeah, well, so you're definitely hitting on one of the major challenges of environmental policy. So what may not work well for this town, right? So if you had very good uptake in human behavior on your multi-stream and you switch to single stream in order to get an uptake in percentage but a decrease in quality, that's a very different situation than a place like Bridgeport, where there is literally no ability to do multi-stream recycling. It's impossible. So single stream is really valuable for places like that.
Put 50 cent deposit on the bottles, they're all around with the store deposit.
Yeah, that's definitely true, but that's packaging EPR. You just designed it for me. Any other questions?
Simple.
Yeah.
Dave Chase. When we do single stream recycling, there's just certain things that just can't put in there. And like aluminum is very valuable, but I can't put some aluminum in there.
Some of it, yeah.
Cast aluminum, sheet aluminum, so on and so forth. I'd love to send it someplace rather than put it in the trash.
So I don't have an answer for you because I don't know the answer, but on our website, if you go to ct.gov/deep, is that / or /? I always get confused. Anyway, there should be information on what you can do with so valuable but hard to recycle objects, whether it's bulky, because I think a lot of the stuff that you're talking about would actually fall into the category of what we call bulky waste, even though not all of it's bulky. And that actually differs depending on where you are. So what the rules are. So you'd have to kind of go there, and it should point you should be able to tell. And if you can't, send me an email and I'll make sure that we can get you better information. It's actually one of the things we're working on is the information on our
So
website.
is the point that single stream recycling can't handle those kinds of things?
Yeah, single stream recycling generally goes along with a mechanical intervention, so that there is a system with conveyor belts and all kinds of things that has the ability to take certain things out, but it does not do a good job if the object itself either can't fit on the conveyor belt or for some reason can't get pulled out the way that the other things are.
Gotcha.
Yep.
I just want to ask one
Yeah.
quick question. New Canaan, we've discussed this in our recycling committee meetings. New Canaan has the highest recycling rate. I think it's close to 60.
Okay,
It's way
I can
up
definitely
there.
believe that. Yeah.
Have you talked to anyone in New Canaan about what their secret is?
No, I have not personally done that, although different recycling rates tend to be driven by a simultaneity of policy and politics. I think New Canaan also, so your sweet spot for recycling rates tends to be wealthier communities with large amounts of space and politically invested and concerned citizens. Stonington also has a really high rate. And Stonington has pay-as-you-throw also. But yeah, so I don't have an answer for that. I think that it'd be great if recycling committees, and maybe we can be the conduit for that, can start to interact with one another so that they can learn some best practices. And it's definitely a role that Dept would like to play for folks.
I want to say thank you very much. Because one thing, and I was just thinking, because I've got this quote here, it's use it up, wear it out, make it do or do without.
It's very New England.
problem.
Yeah, that's very
And
New
it's
England.
essentially reduce, reuse, recycle in colonial times. And the ethic you're talking about with us, cleaning the bottle before we throw it in our single stream recycling, we can return to this. And we do have invested people in our communities. So we want to keep talking with you. We're planning a composting forum for the fall, and then hopefully a forum with our business community and how, there's a green bottom line now too to help them. But we can make this happen, and we fit that demographic that you're talking about. We are a well-off community. We have space. We have educated people. We should be one of the leaders in the state, and I know we all want to get us there. So we will be talking to you.
We're here to help.
In that educational program, and just want to say thank you so much.
Thank you all. Thanks.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.